Good afternoon. My name is Tarra Ellis, and my life's work has centered around restoring the flow. So being the educator that I am, when I heard the theme of the conference, I had to look up the word flow, and you've seen various iterations of the definition of flow throughout the conference so far. But it reminded me of my upbringing because I am a country girl turned city girl. Any country girls, country boys out in the audience? Okay, I see you. So my grandfather was born in Walkertown, North Carolina, and he used to take us out in the country. And my grandfather hunted, my grandfather cut down firewood. He used to put us in the back of his station wagon and drive us around those winding country roads. And we spent a lot of time as his grandkids in and near streams and creeks. And we used to play in those streams and creeks. So I know a little bit about flow. But at the same time, I also know about stagnation. And I know what happens when the flow ceases to exist. I know what happens when water stands still. And I know in standing water, that's a place where mosquitoes like to breed, disease-carrying mosquitoes. I know that it's a place, it's an incubator for bacteria and for parasites. And unfortunately, this is a pretty appropriate analogy of the experience of many of our children going through our educational system. And for many of us, it's more comfortable for us to turn a blind eye. We hear about achievement gaps. We hear about gaps in educational outcomes, but we'd like to not disrupt our own flow. So the gaps in the flow. There's a large segment of our population among our students, predominantly students of color and students of lower socioeconomic status, that go to school and they hear what they should do in school and what the outcomes should be. They hear that they should get a good education and afterwards they'll be able to get a good job and have a successful life and so on, but their experiences have been far from that. And so these students have self-reported feelings of alienation, high rates of absenteeism, and higher dropout rates. What we'd like to tell ourselves and what makes us feel better is to say, well, those students, they just don't care. Their parents just don't care about education. But study after study has shown that underprivileged students and their parents do value education, and they express the value of education in their homes and in their communities. And it reminds me of my own home growing up, because my parents weren't able to attend every extracurricular event that I participated in. And my parents weren't at the school all the time, and they weren't the helicopter parents that I can be sometimes. But my parents unequivocally told us at home education is important. You need education to get further in life, and they emphasize the value of education. So we can't explain away the gaps by saying that people and their families just don't care. So on the screen, you'll see some data about reading and math gaps. And I chose to focus on reading and math gaps, not only because time prevents me from talking about more, but also because reading and math, being below reading and math, is the strongest predictor of dropping out of school. So you see the gap between whites and blacks. There are large discrepancies between 4th grade, between 8th grade, and even going on till 12th grade. Between whites and Hispanics, same thing. Those gaps still persist, and we cannot explain away them by saying that those students just don't care. There are gaps in standardized test scores, gaps in their graduation rates, gaps in their college attendance, and consequently, gaps in their career opportunities, their advancement, and their chances for success in the future. Okay, Tara, we know what the problems are, so what can we do about those problems? Well, we can start to restore the flow by debunking the myths. And one of the greatest myths is the myth of meritocracy. It appeals to our sense of fairness. We want things to be fair. We want to believe that if you work hard, if you are self-motivated, if you just persist, no matter what your background is, no matter how difficult your life challenges, you can succeed. You can have a piece of the American pie. You can achieve the American dream. But for countless students, they go into schools and then beyond school, and they find that that has been far from their reality. There is a phenomenon that sociologists call second-generation segregation. So we know Brown versus Board. Basically, led to the desegregation of schools. Well, schools started to be resegregated within schools. Academic tracking is grouping students by their perceived ability levels and achievement. So many students go to school, and usually students of color and students from lower socioeconomic backgrounds are in those remedial and those lower tracks. And in those tracks, they're not getting the essential knowledge and the skills that they need to be successful on those standardized test scores that have become the gatekeepers to the next grade, the gatekeepers to getting into college. They're doing rote, drill, memorization, worksheet kind of things and not being challenged in those classes. Schools that are highly stratified with academic tracking report higher levels of absenteeism, higher dropout rates, and grade retention rates. And we know that a student who is retained in a grade is 6 times more likely to drop out than other students. Okay, so let's desegregate the schools again within. So let's get the races and socioeconomic groups in the same schools. Let's shake up these classes and mix them up. What happens when we do that? Well, for many of us, the thought comes that when those kids get into my kids' school, or when those kids get into the more rigorous and challenging classes with my kids, then that's going to reduce the quality of my kids' education. And I stand here ashamed to say that I realize that I can relate to that a little bit more than I thought. My kids attend one of the largest school districts in North Carolina, and when I used to teach in that school district, they had a race-based school assignment plan, and the purpose was very noble. Their purpose was to integrate the schools. Their purpose was to socioeconomically and racially integrate the schools so that they could make sure that all students were receiving high-quality education, that all students had access to quality programming. A family challenged that, and so the lawsuit resulted in that policy being overturned, and they could no longer use race to balance out the races in their schools for their school assignment plan. Fast forward about a year ago, the local newspaper published an article and said that this school system is the most segregated school system in North Carolina. Duh. So they decided this time to go about it using socioeconomic status. So the school system set about to redesign the school assignment plan based on socioeconomic status. And if you know anything about socioeconomic status, then you know that by default, they would also be addressing the integration of the races as well. So my kids attend a magnet school, a STEM magnet school. I've been very pleased with it. I've had one son to go through it. I have 2 coming through it right now. But as a parent, even knowing the work that I do and knowing what I know, I have to admit that one of my first thoughts was, what's going to happen to the quality of education? And I thought, my kids' school is already racially diverse. It's already socioeconomically diverse. You know, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. You know, leave it alone. Just go mess with these other schools out here. Leave our school alone. And so I had to be reminded of what I'm about to tell you, which is the work of 553 social scientists. They presented a brief to the courts on behalf of a school system that was attempting to do the same thing. And they basically brought their life's work together, all of their research, their wisdom, and their experiences. And they said unequivocally that racially integrated schools provide significant benefits for all students across the board. Racial integration promotes cross-racial understanding and reduces racial prejudice. It's very difficult to harbor fear and to harbor stereotypes about people and other peers that you interact with on a daily basis, that you ride the bus with, that you're in clubs with, that you interact in a meaningful way in classrooms with. That racial integration improves critical thinking skills and academic achievement. When you're in a classroom with students who come from different backgrounds and have different perspectives, you are forced to do more complex thinking. Racial integration improves life opportunities. Students who wouldn't ordinarily have access to some of the social networks and professional networks to go on and apply and be accepted into colleges and to secure successful careers afterwards now are exposed to that. Racially integrated schools better prepare students for a diverse workforce. It helps to reduce residential segregation. If we go to school together, it's okay. We can also live together, and it increases parental involvement. And then we know that the opposite is true as well. Racially isolated minority schools have had harmful educational implications for students in general. So once we get these students in the same schools, most people don't have a problem with that. Once we get the students in the same classrooms, what is even more important is what we do with those students once they are there. The late Dr. Asa Hilliard III had studied the gap closers for over 40 years, and he came to this conclusion, that the real cause of the achievement gap is the differential treatment that the students receive. He said, in fact, it is not an achievement gap, it is a treatment gap. And in about 13 years of studying the gap closers, I have to agree with Dr. Hilliard. So I'm going to mention 4 gap closers here today. I could spend all day mentioning several more. I'm not even going to do these 4 any justice, but we don't have to reinvent the wheel. There have been people doing this for years who have been successful with teaching students who come from impoverished backgrounds, students who come from disadvantaged backgrounds, for teaching students of all races in the classroom and have been extremely successful. So we could learn a lot from what they do. So I'll mention urban prep academies in Chicago doing some tremendous work with young men from disadvantaged backgrounds, boasting 100% graduation rate year after year, 100% college acceptance rate year after year, and going a step further and equipping those students with what they need to be successful once they're in college. The late Marva Collins, also in Chicago, founded Westside Preparatory School in Chicago. She literally taught the least of these. She taught students that no one else wanted to teach, students that were considered unteachable, mentally unteachable. And those students today and since then have gone on to some of the most prestigious careers and have made an impact in Chicago and beyond. The KIPP program, the Knowledge is Power program, they boast a network of schools in underserved communities, in rural and urban communities, where they put the time in to close those gaps. The late Jaime Escalante, whose students were in East LA, and he taught them calculus. He dared to teach them calculus, and even dared to have them to take the AP calculus exam. And those students did so well on that exam that the Educational Testing Service said, something is not right. No way, Jaime, no. And so they took the test again, and they did as well or even better on that test. Students who were considered to be hopeless, students who came from these families that people assumed didn't care, students who people thought were not capable. So in my studies of the gap closers, I've found that they have 3 things in common, and I like to call them the 3 R's. The first one is rigor. They communicate high expectations of success for all students. When you go in their schools, you see college paraphernalia everywhere. You see internship opportunities posted. You see who's gotten into what colleges. You see which scholarships are being offered, what scholarships they've secured. You see individual goals posted, school-wide goals, classroom goals, the strategic steps that it takes to get to those goals, the tracking of those goals. Their course offerings rival some of the most prestigious preparatory schools across the nation. Their teachers are highly qualified and they want to be there. Their assignments are meaningful. They're doing problem solving. They're doing critical thinking with real world applications. And they give the students the supports that they need to reach the high expectations. Second, relationships. There's a heavy emphasis on relationships. There's at least one adult in that building that students know that they can go to and confide in and who will fight for them. The schools are inclusive. Classrooms are welcoming and inviting. Students feel safe, feel a sense of belonging, and feel safe to take risks. The teachers know their students and their families. Teachers are community building within the classroom, so it's not just about the teacher-to-student relationship, but they're building student-to-student relationships, and they nurture those parents and community partnerships. And finally, relevance. Dr. Naeem Akbar talked about a legacy of competence, where students can see themselves and see what they have done throughout history via people who look like them, people who come from similar backgrounds as they do. So these students see themselves reflected in the content. They know what people of different races and genders and ethnicities and linguistic backgrounds and socioeconomic backgrounds have contributed to all the different fields that they are studying, who have invented different things and what they have contributed to the world. There's real world applications of what they're learning. How can I use this now in my everyday life? How can I use this in my future life? Students' funds of knowledge is capitalized upon. Students' knowledge and experiences that they bring into the classroom, the teachers make connections to that and build upon that. Students have a voice in the classroom. Students have a voice in the school. They're represented on the leadership teams making decisions for the schools. They have outlets of expressions. They're considered co-constructors of knowledge. So I challenge you. So as a teacher educator, I know that education preparation programs, administrators, educational policymakers, we have to go about the business of preparing teachers to be gap closers. Dr. Hilliard said, you can't believe that all students can learn, but that all teachers cannot. So we have to set about preparing up-and-coming teachers and retraining those who are in the classroom to be gap closers. And for parents and community stakeholders who are concerned about me and my 3 or my 4 and no more, I just leave this with you. Justice will not be served until those who are unaffected are as outraged as those who are. Thank you.